All right, today we're finishing our study on the parables of the kingdom of heaven that are found in Matthew's gospel. Many of the parables ended with the same warning. A day is coming when a sorting will take place. The good will be separated from the bad. Truth will be separated from lies. Only those who have their lives built on the truth will take a permanent residence in the kingdom of God. Early in the series, we looked about separating the wheat from the tares. We also looked at the parable about separating the good fish from the bad fish once the net had been brought in. The past couple of weeks, we've been looking at the parables in Matthew chapter 25. Those parables, once again, talk about the sorting that will take place on Judgment Day. There is a day coming when all of us will have to give an account to God for what we've done with our lives and what we did with our time while we were here on earth. Jesus made it clear that as citizens of the kingdom, we are to live our lives for Him and not to please ourselves. We're to recognize that everything we have belongs to Him and is to be used for Him. On Judgment Day, He's not going to care what kind of degrees we had or what kind of positions we had or how successful our business was. He's not going to ask any of those questions. Those things are important in the earthly kingdom, but they matter very little to God. All God wants to know is how did we use what He gave us to further His kingdom? How did we use what He gave us to tell people the good news of the kingdom? It won't matter on Judgment Day how many people knew us. What's going to matter is how many people know Jesus because of us. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10, we read this scripture last week. Each of you should use whatever gift, or we could add an S after that, each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others. They're not for us, they're to serve others, as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. Colossians chapter 3, verse 17. Whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all. Everybody say all. Whatever you do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through Him. Today we're looking at the last part of Matthew chapter 25. This is the conclusion of Jesus' teaching about the sorting that will take place. And it talks about what He will be using as the true test of whether or not someone really belonged to Him. In this parable, He talks about separating sheep from the goats. Now, there is some debate as to whether or not this is really a parable or not. Some people say it's not a parable because He didn't say the kingdom of heaven is like or it will be like. Most of the parables He started out saying He's making a comparison. I believe it is a parable because He's still using something of an earthly nature to illustrate a spiritual application. So I'm calling it a parable, and it follows up the parables of the kingdom. So starting Matthew chapter 25, starting with verse 31, it says, when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the angels with Him, He will sit on His glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before Him, and He will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on His right and the goats on His left. Then the King will say to those on His right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer Him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The King will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Then He will say to those on His left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? He will reply, truly I tell you, Whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. Why the analogy of sheep versus goats? Why didn't he just say good people versus bad people or something else? Why did he compare us to sheep and goats? If you think about it, goats really get a bad rap. I mean, are goats really that bad? We hear goats used as metaphors all the time when describing people with sayings such as, you old goat, meaning an old fool. Or we say, that really gets my goat, meaning that really irritates me. I was trying to think, are there any good analogies for a goat? Do we ever say anything positive about a goat? Why are the goats treated with such contempt? Is Jesus saying that sheep are good and goats are bad? Both sheep and goats were considered clean animals for the Jews. Both were kosher when it came to food. Both were acceptable sacrifices, and both were used for clothing. Of course, you use the whole goat skin and you just use the wool from the sheep, but still, they were both acceptable for use. So why does Jesus make such a big deal over separating the sheep from the goats? Why didn't he use something else? Now, before I go on, I want to do a little test to find out how many of you would be able to do the sorting. It says the Son of Man, Jesus, is going to separate the sheep from the goats. So let's find out how good you are at distinguishing sheep from goats. I've got some pictures here. You're going to tell me, is this a sheep or a goat? Let's show the first one. Is that a sheep or a goat? Good job. How about the next one? Goats. Okay. How about this one? Sheep or goat? Sheep, are you sure? That's a teenage sheep. Ed's back there saying, I wish I had that much hair. Next one. Oh, what is that? Sheep or goat? Baby sheep or baby goat? Sheep, I should say kid or what do they call lamb? Kid or lamb? It's a sheep. Okay, how about the next one? Sheep or goat? Goat. Okay, next one. Sheep or goat? Sheep. He doesn't like you guys. How about the next one? Goat. Okay, how about this one? Sheep or goat? Are you sure? That's a goat. That is an Angora goat. That's what they make Angora sweaters from. That is an Angora goat. That is not a sheep. So we think we can tell the difference between a sheep and a goat. It's not always so clear whether it's a sheep or a goat. Hold those other couple pictures for a difference there, or for a minute there until I tell you to change it. Most of the sheep that we have here in America have been specially bred over the years to have nice wool, because the primary thing we use sheep for is for their wool. But in Jesus' day, and still in some countries, goats are also used for wool. As example, the Angora goat there. You can't always tell the difference between a sheep and a goat based on whether or not it has horns, because all goats don't have horns. Most goats do. There are some breeds of goats that don't have horns. Furthermore, the goat herders would often take the horns off of the goats because they would hurt each other, or maybe even hurt the goat herder if they didn't like where the goat herder was trying to take them. So it was very common for them to debud or dehorn the goats. And then, if you had a woolly breed of goat, it would make it difficult to tell the difference. As in this next example, this is a goat, obviously, because it's got horns, right? But what happens if you take the horns off of it? Next picture. Now it has no horns. Looks like a sheep to me. Thank you, Jacob, for your Photoshop abilities, taking the horns off of that. That's what that goat would look like without horns. So sometimes it is hard to tell the difference. Our common thinking of sheep and goats, we can automatically tell, but it's not always that simple. But Jesus says he's going to separate the sheep from the goats. You can't always tell by looking at them. So how are you going to tell the difference between the sheep and the goats? They're not being separated based on the way they look or whether or not they're useful for food or clothing, because they were both useful for food and clothing. What is the real difference between a sheep and a goat? There's several. But I want to talk about a couple of them. And I think the difference is pretty clearly described in the parable. Jesus says how he tells which ones are sheep and which ones are goats. But I want to first give you a couple facts about sheep and goats that are pretty standard. Regardless of what breed of sheep or goat you have, these are some facts about sheep and goats that are pretty common. And when you understand these things, it makes perfect sense why Jesus would compare people to sheep and goats. Because we start looking at these, you could say, I know some people like that. Okay, well, if they're like that, they're a sheep or they're a goat, based on the attribute. Sheep realize that they need a shepherd and will usually follow the shepherd wherever he goes. A goat goes wherever it pleases and doesn't really care whether there's a shepherd there or not. A goat says, I can do this on my own. Sheep follow the shepherd. Goat herders herd goats or chase goats. You've got to chase them down because they're everywhere. Anybody ever had a goat? Is that true? Goats go wherever they want to go. Sheep will sometimes wander off because they're not paying attention. But then they realize, where's my shepherd? And they start worrying because there's no shepherd. The goat, there could be no shepherd for miles, and it doesn't care because it doesn't think it needs him. A goat is always testing the boundaries and trying to get what's on the other side of the fence. It's almost impossible to pen in a goat. But a sheep is happy to stay within the confines that the shepherd has set up. As long as the shepherd's taking care of it, it doesn't care what's on the other side of the fence. I got plenty of grass. I got plenty of water. I got just what I need right here. The shepherd's going to provide for me. I don't need what's on the other side of the fence. You will find very few wild sheep, but there are many wild goats because goats are independent. Has that described any people you know? Any of those things? Not needing boundaries. I can do this on my own. Just let me run. Let me make my own rules. I don't need to be confined. I don't need somebody telling me what to do. I'm going to go out on my own. I want to see what's out there. I want to test it. Sheep are passive and seldom get into scuffles. Goats have short tempers and are quarrelsome. Oh, that describes a few people right there. Goats butt each other and fight for position and dominance. Goats will push everyone else out of the way to get all the best food. They don't know the meaning of the word share. Sheep are courteous and will move to allow another sheep to get in and graze next to it. In other words, sheep share the bounty, while goats try to keep it all to themselves. And I think that's what Jesus is referring to in the parable when he says, I'm going to separate the sheep from the goats. The sheep and goats are separated because of their attitude or their actions. It's not because of the way they look, the way they were dressed. They're separated because of their behaviors. The goats believed that everything was theirs and fought to keep it all. The sheep realized everything they had was supplied by the shepherd and that he would continue to supply. There was plenty to go around, and they helped each other to make sure that no one went without. So Jesus tells his story about sheep and goats. The sheep are the ones that looked out for each other and helped each other when one was in need. The goats only thought of themselves and what they wanted. Jesus is no way saying that just because a person does good things, like looking after those in need, they will make it to heaven. That would be salvation by works. Jesus doesn't say you get into heaven because of your works. We don't earn our place into heaven. But because we are going to heaven, because we do know the shepherd, it should change the way we act. And those good deeds should flow from us. In fact, there are a lot of non-believers who act more like sheep than some of us who are supposed to be sheep. There are a lot of non-believers who do more to help needy people than some of us. We should do it because we're sheep. It is possible to pretend to be a sheep and still not make it to heaven. Jesus talked about that in Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 to 23. He said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Now this talks about some of those who were acting like sheep, but weren't true sheep. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did not we prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evil doers. It is possible to act like a sheep and still not be a sheep. Jesus even said that sometimes a wolf would pretend to be a sheep to get access to the flock. He talks about wolves in sheep clothing. Now, I don't know if that actually happens in real life. Have you ever seen a wolf put on a sheep costume? I've seen it in the cartoons. I don't know if that really happens, but if a wolf could dress like a sheep, it would. It would do anything to have access to the sheep. So that's one of the analogies that Jesus uses that I don't know if it's really true to life, but he was saying there are people that will try to disguise themselves to get in and to cause damage to the flock. The sheep in this parable weren't doing good things simply to get a reward for themselves. They weren't pretending to be something they weren't. Their actions simply flowed out of who and what they were. We're not saved because of what we do. But if we are saved, our actions and the way we treat others should automatically reflect Christ. In James chapter 2, verses 14 to 17, it says, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. An anonymous letter was once written by a homeless person. It read as follows. I was standing outside in the bitter cold the other day. You saw me without a coat, shivering in the cold. And you prayed that God would warm me up. I was hungry, and you reminded me that God provides our daily bread. I was looking for a place to stay, and you prayed that God would help me find shelter. I appreciate your prayers, and I appreciate your words of encouragement, but I'm still cold. I'm still hungry, and I'm still without a place to stay. There are many ways to help someone in need. Sometimes we might not have the ability to actually provide for them personally, but we can take the time to help them find help. Often people simply hand someone $1 because it makes them feel like they've done something. Here, let me give you $1, and then we go on our way. Sometimes the $1 isn't even what they needed, and we're doing that to ease our conscience. They may not spend the $1 on what you hope they're going to spend it on. And that's why some people refuse to give, because how do I know they're going to actually use this? They say they're hungry, but how do I know they're actually going to use it for food? And a lot of them won't use it for food. I at least appreciate the guy that I saw standing in the corner with the sign and said, I'm going to be honest with you, I need a beer. At least he's being honest. I almost wanted to give him $1 for being honest. Thank you for being honest. I didn't provide his beer, but I almost wanted to. Sometimes it's better to support an agency that helps those in need, like the Union Gospel Mission, or Camp Hope, or Love Inc., or the Salvation Army. Support them so that they can provide for these people that are in need, because they cannot provide what they don't have. So sometimes, instead of just giving it ourselves, we can provide for those. Because a lot of us say, well, I'm not going to help this person because I don't know what they're going to do with it. Well, have you provided it another way? Have you provided to someone who can help them? But even so, even if we're giving to those places, we still need to try to connect them with those places, because I can be supporting the Union Gospel Mission. And by the way, our mission here in Yakima is one of the nicest missions in the United States. It is a beautiful place. It's a remodeled hotel. Now, the guys still end up sleeping on the floor in one big room, but if it's a lady, she's got an actual hotel room. that she's sharing with about 4. I think there's about 4 per room or something like that. It's a nice place. It's not a dump. It is a nice place. But we can be supporting them, but if somebody's needing a place to stay and we don't at least offer them a ride there or at least tell them that it's available, what good is that? So you know what? I give monthly to support the Union Gospel Mission. They have beds. Let me take you down there. You can have a place to stay tonight. And that's when you find out if they really want help or not. And you know what I hear all the time? They don't have any room. Well, let me call them and see. Sometimes I call them. There is a room there. They just didn't want to stay there. They're wanting me to get them a hotel room. There is a room there. I call them. There is a room. So I offer to take them. And if they refuse to go, you know what? I guess you don't really need a place to stay that bad. I've supported the mission. I've offered to give you a ride there. I guess you don't need it. The mission provides 3 meals a day. Some missions only do dinner. Ours does breakfast, lunch, and dinner for anyone that's hungry to come. The people can go in there and get breakfast. They can go in there to get lunch. So maybe just offer them a ride there. Say, you know what? There's a free meal already provided for you right here. Camp Hope doesn't turn people away. They've got beds. They've got food. So a lot of these people out there, either they don't know about it or they're simply not taking advantage of it. Here in Yakima, we have a lot of ways to supply needs. But simply walking by them and ignoring them is not helping them at all. Sometimes you find out what they really need by offering them what they say they need. I used to carry McDonald's gift certificates around with me everywhere I went. And when I see somebody in need, they say, hungry, need food. I say, here's a couple of McDonald's certificates of McDonald's up in the corner. I don't want those. I guess you're not hungry then. I mean, I was trying to help you with what you needed. I love taking people in and having a meal with them and talking to them. I was at Home Depot one time. This wasn't here. This was the Home Depot in California. We were there, and I stopped to get some stuff for the house, and there's this guy going from car to car and hitting people up as they got out of their cars. Asked him, said, I'm hungry. I haven't eaten for 3 days. Can you help me with something to eat? And everybody said, just leave me alone. Get away from me. And he came up and he said, I'm really hungry. He says, I haven't had anything to eat for 3 days. I said, you know what? I said, I haven't had breakfast yet. There's Burger King right here. Let's go in, let's get a bite to eat together. And we went in there, I bought him breakfast, and I sat there and I talked to him over breakfast. And he was so appreciative of him. Now, I've tried that with other people. They say they're hungry, and I say, let me take you and buy some. Oh, I don't like Burger King. I don't want that. Just give me some money. No, you said you're hungry. So it's a good way to find out what they need, but just ignoring them and saying, well, they're probably not going to use it for that. That's us justifying it in our own minds. There are many ways to help people, and just handing them money usually is not the way to help them because you don't know for sure whether or not they need it. But there is something that you can do. And if there's not something you can personally do, you can at least point them to somebody who can help them or take them somewhere where they can get the assistance that they need. One thing we should never do is do nothing. Jesus never walked away from anyone that had this is the key word, genuine need. We read many times in the Gospels the words, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. And what did he do because he had compassion? It always follows up with, he had compassion on them, so he healed them. Or he had compassion on them. He saw the crowd of people that hadn't eaten, he had compassion on them, so he fed them. He had compassion. Our compassion moves us to do something. It doesn't say, well, that's their problem. I'm walking off the other direction. If we truly love, we will be compelled to do something. We can't let them just stay there. 1 John chapter 3, verses 16 to 18 says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions, is there anybody here who doesn't have material possessions? Some have more than others, but we all have material possessions. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love in words or speech, but with actions and with truth. Our job as true believers, as citizens of the kingdom, is to carry out the mission of Christ. What was his mission? He told us what his mission was in Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. He was quoting the prophet Isaiah. He said, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. While Jesus was here on earth, he never turned a blind eye to someone in need. He healed the sick. He fed the hungry. He clothed the naked or poor. His mission was all about meeting people in their time of need. And he wants us to carry on his mission. His mission for us is nothing new. He gave the same command to the Israelites through Moses. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 17 and 19, God said, "For the Lord your God is God of gods and the Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and he loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt." A few chapters later, in chapter 15, starting in verse 7, he says, "If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards them. Rather be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The 7th year, the year for canceling debts, is near, so that you will not show ill will towards the needy among your fellow Israelites and give them nothing." Now, what he's talking about there is the year of Jubilee. Every seventh year, they would cancel all debts. You couldn't get a loan for more than 7 years because they would be canceled after the 7 years. And he's saying, don't loan them, or don't not loan them just because it's only 6 months away from that time when it's going to cancel. You're afraid you're not going to get paid back. If they need it, give it to them. Don't consider it a loan. Consider it a gift. They may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. Give generously to them, and do so without a grudging heart. Then, because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. If we give to others, he will give back. Give, and it shall be given to you. Pressed down, shaken together, running out all over. Give to them, and then he will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. Therefore, or there will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed towards your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. So it wasn't something that Jesus came up with new in the New Testament. It has always been God's will that his people would help others who have and I'm going to put the quote's going to get it, who have a genuine need. Sometimes it takes a little digging to find out if that need is genuine or not. One of the commentators for the Life Application Study Bible adds this commentary to the passage that we're looking at today. It says, God will separate his obedient followers from pretenders and unbelievers. The real evidence of our belief is the way we act. To treat all persons we encounter as if they were Jesus is no easy task. What we do for others demonstrates what we really think about Jesus' words to us. Feed the hungry. Give the homeless a place to stay. Look after the sick. How well do your actions separate you from pretenders and unbelievers? Now notice that neither the sheep nor the goats even realized what they had or had not done. Both the sheep and the goats said, "When did we see you hungry or naked or in prison?" Now the sheep had seen it and just done something. They didn't realize it was Jesus. They just did it. And they're saying, "Well, no, Jesus, we didn't see you. We just did what we do because we're sheep." The goats probably had seen those people, but just ignored them. Now, if it was Jesus, if you saw Jesus on the street corner holding a sign, would you help Jesus? First off, I don't think Jesus would be on the street corner holding a sign. If he needed to eat, he'd turn a rock into food or something. But if you knew it was Jesus, would you help? Jesus says, when you do it for one of the least of these, you have done it for me. Neither the sheep or the goats realized what they had or had not done. The sheep simply saw a need and helped. They They didn't stop to think about whether or not they should, or is this or isn't this Jesus. They just did what came naturally to them because they're a sheep, and sheep share. The goats may or may not have noticed the person, but it didn't matter to them, because if it didn't help them, if it wasn't going to pad their bank account or feed their belly, they don't care about anyone else. They only care about themselves. The sheep are literally shocked that they have done anything of value. And they're even more shocked that they're being rewarded for it. Why should I get a reward for just doing what I do? I'm a sheep. That's what sheep do. Why should there be a reward for it? The last thing on their minds was, what's in it for me? That's quite a contrast from those we read about a little bit ago in Matthew chapter 7, who were trying to tell Jesus all the things they did. Jesus, remember, I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and I did this. Sheep don't do that. Sheep don't even keep track. They just did it because that's who they are. There are sheep, there are goats, and there are imposters. Sheep just do what they're supposed to do because they're a sheep. Goats don't even try to do the right thing because they're independent. They don't need anybody, and they don't think anybody needs them. I could do this all on my own. Take care of number one. Goats don't even notice someone in need. The imposters look good to us because they're doing what they're supposed to do, but they're doing it for the wrong reasons. Because just doing the deeds is still not going to get us into heaven. We have to have that heart change. We have to belong to Jesus. But then because we belong to Jesus, if we belong to Jesus, the actions should follow the changes taking place on the inside. Sheep don't have to stop and think, should I or shouldn't I? Sheep just do it because that's what sheep do. It comes from the inside. Jesus said when we do something for the least of these, we're doing it unto him. But not only are we doing it unto him, we're also doing it because of him. We're being his hand extended to the world. We become Jesus to someone who otherwise would never meet him. Until they see him in us, they will never see him. And I want to close with this story. It's supposed to be a true story. I can't verify it. Sometimes you see stories that are supposed to be true, and it's hard to verify some of these stories. But a pastor's wife was shopping in New York. They must have been pastoring in New York, or they could have been on vacation, I don't know, but traveling through New York in winter. Walked by a shoe store, and there was a little boy on the street with old rat shoes with holes in them and no socks. His feet were freezing, and he was in there staring in the window of the shoe store. And she asked him, she said, "What are you doing, son?" He said, "I'm just standing here praying that Jesus would give me that pair of shoes." She said, I need shoes. My feet are cold. I'm praying and asking God to give me those shoes. She took the young man by the hand and took him into the store and asked him what his size was, and asked the clerk to get those shoes off the shelf for his feet. And at the same time, she went and she bought a package of socks. And she put the socks on his feet, and she put the shoes on his feet, and she handed him the extra socks so he'd have some clean socks to wear. She paid for the shoes, and she paid for the socks. And as the little boy got ready to leave the store, he looked up at his pastor's wife. He said, "Are you God's wife?" She said, "No." He said, "Well, I asked God for shoes, and you gave them to me." We may not actually be God's wife, but we are part of the bride of Christ. We talked about that a few weeks ago. If we are the bride of Christ, shouldn't we be doing what Christ himself would do? Helping those who are in need? Shouldn't we bear the name proudly and demonstrate that we are who we claim to be?